On a misty September morning, John, a 14-year-old black boy, stood silently before the gates of Riverdale High School, where reputation arrived long before any welcome. A worn-out backpack hung loosely over his left shoulder. His white shirt was crisp but oversized, revealing a frame that was petite, skinny, and full of quiet determination. He wasn't the kind of student who was dropped off in sleek cars. He wasn't the type of person expected to shine in these marble hallways. But hidden beneath that modest exterior was a born musical prodigy, a gift handed down by fate, quietly, without fanfare. John whispered a familiar line his father always told him. "You don't need to be accepted. Just be so good they can't deny you." Though he couldn't shake the feeling of being out of place, he stepped through the threshold, carrying every ounce of hope, fear, and an unbreakable love for music, the only language that ever truly made him feel heard. He'd gotten into Riverdale on a rare music scholarship, not because of his background, but because of a video that captured his piano performance during a local competition. The footage had gone semi-viral. One judge said, "If emotions had a shape, this boy's hands just drew it." Still, no praise could quiet John's unease, stepping into a place where being different wasn't always welcomed. From the first music class, the divide was apparent. Glances that lingered too long, stifled laughter in corners, and then there was Ms. Helen, the department's teacher, a woman known for her strictness and a devotion to tradition so rigid it barely allowed room to breathe. She looked at John with a silent stare, as if trying to measure a foreign object's worth. "You're the scholarship student?" Her voice was sharp, cool, and loaded. "Yes, ma'am. I play piano and a bit of guitar," John replied softly, eyes respectfully lowered. Ms. Helen gave a slight nod, though the corner of her mouth tightened slightly, a gesture that felt like a question mark pressing against John's chest. He didn't know it yet, but inside that room a journey was about to begin that would test not only his musicality, but also his identity, beliefs, and power to change a system built to keep voices like his in the shadows. The wall clock in Riverdale's music room ticked each minute with a subtle warning. Here, perfection was the standard, not difference. John sat in the last row, far from the grand Steinway piano that sat center stage, reserved only for the chosen students. He watched his classmates, polished, confident sheet music in hand, some with private tutors trailing behind them. John brought no sheet music, no workbook, just his memory, his ears, his heart. Ms. Helen scanned the room, her eyes landing on John. "I believe every student here was admitted for a reason. But not all value is immediately apparent," she said, then glanced at the roster. "John, if you truly know how to play, come forward. Show us a few bars so we can assess." The room fell silent. John stood. His steps felt heavy as he approached the piano. Sweat beaded on his brow, not out of fear of hitting the wrong note, but from the intensity of the stares sharper than any mirror. Ms. Helen folded her arms. Some students leaned forward, expecting awkwardness. One or two were already bracing to laugh. John placed his hands on the keys, took a deep breath. He didn't play Bach, or Chopin, or any well-known classical piece. Instead, he let his fingers guide him. The notes flowed freely, like a small stream weaving through the forest, sometimes gentle, sometimes wild. A composition never written, in a language entirely his own, achingly beautiful. At first, no one quite understood what they were hearing, but slowly the whispers quieted and silence swallowed the room. Ms. Helene softened. Her fingers stopped tapping against her arm. She, too, seemed carried away for a moment, just a moment. When John played the final chord, the room returned to stillness, not from disappointment, but because no one knew how to react. "Thank you," Ms. Helen said, her tone calm and unreadable. An emotional style. But here, we prioritize technique. Personal flair can be developed later. A brief reminder that even if John could stir hearts, it still wasn't enough for her. He returned to his seat, not defeated, but fully aware that he had just entered a world where music came with a mold. And he was made to fit one. But John didn't come to fit in. He came to prove that emotion is a kind of technique that no one can teach, only feel. That afternoon, Riverdale's courtyard sat quietly under autumn leaves shifting color. As the dismissal bell rang, students poured out like currents in a stream, some rushing to the cafeteria, others to the soccer field, and many sliding into the backs of waiting cars. But John took the hallway behind the music building, where the lights flickered and footsteps were few. At the very end was a small room with a worn sign. "Practice Room B is off limits after 5 p.m. The door was never locked. The room, forgotten by most, was a sanctuary for John. Here, no grades, no judgment, no molds. He sat at the old piano in the corner. The keys were worn, slightly off pitch, but that didn't stop him. He closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and began to pour out the melody that had been echoing in his head for days. At first, the notes were scattered, like whispers from a memory. But then they found shape. John wasn't practicing, he was releasing. Every sharp word from Ms. Helen, every doubting glance from a classmate, every moment he felt swallowed by the pressure of a prestigious school, he typed into the keys. The high notes were his anger, the lows his sorrow, the flourish unspoken resistance, and he played on, unaware that someone was listening just beyond the door. Marcus is a quiet classmate, usually seated by the window on the left. He had been passing by, heard the music, and stopped. Eyes narrowing, his hand was still gripping his backpack. Because he realized something. John, the quiet kid at the back of the room, was an entire orchestra waiting to be heard. Marcus pushed the door open as the final note faded warm, low, like a sigh. "Was that yours?" he asked, voice full of disbelief. John turned, startled. "Yeah, I'm not great at reading sheet music like the others. I memorize. I listen." Marcus stepped closer. "I play violin, but I've never heard anyone play like that. Really. You should let people hear this." John smiled, shook his head. "I just want to play. This room, it's the only place I can be myself." Marcus didn't reply right away. But in his eyes, John saw something for the first time at this school, someone who wasn't looking at him like a scholarship mistake. They saw him for what he truly was, an artist. And maybe that moment was when everything began to change. Monday morning, John walked into the music class with his old backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes fixed on his usual seat. But something felt different today. As he entered, multiple eyes followed him, not with the usual indifference, but with curiosity and a hint of surprise. Marcus was already at his desk, wearing a small smile. "Did you hear? You're famous now." John blinked. "Famous?" "The video I recorded last Friday. You're playing the piano. I posted it on the school forum." John froze for a few seconds. Marcus quickly added, "I didn't include your name, didn't say anything, but some of the teachers on the music board saw it. They were impressed." John sat down, a mix of gratitude and worry swirling inside him. He wasn't afraid of being heard. He was scared of being misunderstood. That morning in music class, Ms. Helen walked in with an unreadable expression. Her eyes swept across the room, then deliberately stopped on John. "We will have a semester recital next month," she announced, holding a list. "And some students will be selected for solo performances. There was a pause, pointed and calculated. John Williams. She said his name slowly, as if testing whether he would flinch. You will perform a solo before the entire class next week. No compliments, no explanation for her choice. Just an order wrapped in something called an opportunity. Marcus glanced at John, frowning slightly. John gave a slight nod, without saying a word. Ms. Helen smiled that cold smile that never reached her eyes. And of course, John will use the school's instrument. No personal instruments allowed. Rules are rules. The class was silent, but everyone understood. This wasn't just a test of skill, it was a test of boundaries. To others, this might be a chance to shine. For John, it was a challenge disguised as a favor. That afternoon, John went home quietly. In his small room, he opened his mother's old guitar, scratched, worn, but never dishonest with the one who played it. He played, not to rehearse, but to keep his heart from turning into armor. Because John knew some opportunities weren't made to lift you. They were designed to shut you out. 1 week later, the music room at Hillside High was filled with a tense, indescribable atmosphere. The chairs were arranged in a semicircle. The school's acoustic guitar was already placed at the center. It was an average model, nothing premium, and in need of tuning, with a far from perfect sound. John entered the room quietly. Everyone else was already seated. Ms. Helen stood at the front like a host introducing a concert. As you all know, today we have a special performance. A new student with a noticeable passion for music, she said, her eyes sliding toward John. Let's see if talent and passion go hand in hand. There were soft murmurs around the room. John stepped forward and gently lifted the guitar into his hands. He tested the strings, his hands familiar with the feedback of his mother's guitar, a wooden instrument nearly 20 years old. But today he was playing something foreign, in a hostile space, surrounded by people who had never truly believed in him. John said nothing. He closed his eyes. And then he began to play. The sound that came forth wasn't loud or showy, but every note landed like a drop of pure water on a still lake, silent, profound, and far-reaching. He started with a classical segment, then transitioned seamlessly into a section of blues with a touch of jazz, like he was telling a story in sound. No words, no explanations, just fingers moving across strings, and the whole room fell silent. No one shifted, no one whispered. Ms. Helen's gaze, which began cold and calculating, gradually changed into something tense and uncertain. The pen in her hand froze mid-air. As John ended the piece with a long, lingering chord, like the last soft breath of a memory, the room was still gripped by its echo. Then suddenly, applause. It came from Marcus. Then a few quiet wows. And then a wave of clapping erupted around the room. John bowed, not like a victor, but like someone who had finally let his inner voice be heard, out loud for the very first time. Ms. Helen cleared her throat, trying to reclaim her composure. "Thank you, John," she said, her voice struggling to stay calm. "An interesting interpretation. However, altering classical compositions must always be approached with caution." But her voice lacked the firmness it usually carried. John only nodded. He didn't need to win an argument. He had already won over the silence. Outside the class, Marcus caught up with him. "Did you see her face when you played?" Marcus whispered. At first she was mad, then surprised. Then, "I think she was scared." John chuckled softly. "Not scared of me, scared of what she can't control." He didn't say more, but deep down he knew something had shifted, not because of the applause, but because he had earned recognition for the first time without asking for it. John was no longer the black scholarship kid. He was the one who made the whole class. Listen, Monday morning. As John stepped into the music class, he could sense something had changed in the air. Gone were the curious or mocking stares. In their place, caution, that invisible line between admiration and doubt. Ms. Helen was already standing behind the teacher's desk, holding a freshly printed stack of sheet music. Her face carried a deliberate expression. "Dear class," she began, "after John's performance last week, I believe it's time we challenge ourselves further. Especially you, John." John looked up, straight at her, not defiant, just ready. "Rodrigo, Concierto de Aranjuez, segundo movimiento. A piece not included in this semester's curriculum. But perhaps you'd like to try." A few students exchanged looks. This piece is one of the most famous and technically challenging classical guitar works ever written. Even adults struggled with it, let alone a 14-year-old boy. John didn't blink. "Yes, ma'am." Ms. Helen seemed caught off guard by how quickly he agreed. A flicker of hesitation passed through her eyes, then vanished. Friday, in front of the class. No one said anything as the school bell rang, but Marcus leaned toward John, voice low. "She's trying to trap you, you know that, right?" John nodded slightly. "I know." "Then are you sure you're gonna—" "Doesn't matter if I'm sure," John said. "I just need to be true to the music." In the days that followed, John disappeared during recess. He didn't chat, didn't eat with Marcus. He drowned himself in sound. Those tricky notes, the complex phrasing, the subtle chord transitions, Rodrigo's piece wasn't just a technical exam. It was a symphony of sorrow, pain, and emotional depth. A sigh from the soul. John understood that. He was learning not just how to play it, but also how to speak through it. Thursday night, John's father walked into the room at 2:14 a.m. The boy sat on the floor, guitar resting across his knees. His eyes were closed, but his hands were still moving instinctively over the strings. "I can't sleep if I don't master that transition," he mumbled. His father said nothing, just sat down beside him, listening in silence. After the final note, John let his hands fall, head resting against the guitar. "I'm scared I'll fail." His father placed a hand on his shoulder. "Failure is what Ms. Helen wants you to believe, but music doesn't care who wins or loses. It only cares if you're true to it." John looked up at his dad. In his eyes, he saw his mother, who used to lull him to sleep with jazz instead of lullabies. "I won't disappoint the music," he whispered. And he didn't know yet that Sophia's quiet hand was spreading the video from his previous performance online. Friday morning, he would perform again. But this time, it wouldn't be to confront a teacher. This time, John would play to prove one thing. He wasn't an exception. He was the new standard. Friday. The sky was grey, heavy. The air around the school campus carried the weight of anticipation. The music room filled early, with music students and kids from other classes. Even a few subject teachers found excuses to drop by. Word had spread. John was going to perform the legendary Rodrigo piece. Rumors of his last performance had traveled farther than he knew. John entered the room wearing a neat but not flashy plain white dress shirt and dark trousers. In his hands was a guitar borrowed from the school's music room. It was not his favorite, but one he had practiced with all week. He had no complaints. Ms. Helen sat front and center. Her gaze was cold but focused. John walked to the front and gave a slight nod. The room fell utterly silent. No introduction, no opening speech, just one deep breath. And the strings began to sing. The opening notes of the second movement adagio rose slowly, like a whisper. At first, it was just a silence being filled. But gradually, that silence transformed into something else. This 14-year-old boy played with the depth of someone who had known loss, who had loved, and who had been hurt. Every finger pressing the strings didn't just make music. It summoned memories, longing, and words left unspoken. The guitar told a story not with lyrics, but with sound. A wordless tale of a mother long gone, of sleepless nights, of dreams running through the veins of a boy who had been overlooked, and of a hunger to be seen, heard, acknowledged. The deeper John went into the piece, the more he surrendered to the music. His eyes closed, no need to look at the frets. His fingers knew. His heart kept tempo. In the front row, Sophia quietly raised her phone again and started recording. But this time, not to prove anything, to capture something no one wanted to forget. When the final note rang out, it didn't vanish. It floated, hanging in the air like the last breath of a soul just released. The entire class sat frozen, no coughs, no whispers. Then a single clap. It was Marcus, followed by a quiet wow. And then applause exploded. From all sides, friends, strangers, and even teachers are sitting silently in the back of the room. Everyone clapped. Some students were wiping away tears. John bowed not deeply, just enough to say, "I gave it my all." He didn't win. He inspired. Ms. Helen didn't rise, she didn't clap, but everyone saw her blinking several times, and in that fleeting moment, her usually cold stare became human. John hadn't broken the rules, he had broken the assumptions. That afternoon, John walked out of the music room in silence. No one stopped him, but everyone turned to watch not with suspicion, but with awe. The awe of witnessing something they never thought a 14-year-old black scholarship kid could do. John said nothing. He didn't need to. The music had spoken for him. That evening, Sophia posted the nearly 6-minute video on her page with the caption, "A 14-year-old prodigy, a Rodrigo performance that stopped hearts, and a school system that needs to take a long look at itself." Within 3 hours, the video reached 20,000 views. By the next morning, it had multiplied fivefold. Comments poured in from former classmates, amateur musicians, and teachers from other states. A renowned musician even shared the video with 4 words, "This is why I teach." Monday morning, as John walked through the school hallway, he was no longer that strange scholarship kid. A student who used to snicker behind his back now awkwardly nodded at him. A history teacher struck up a conversation as John passed by. Even a few upperclassmen stopped him to shake his hand. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew something had shifted. That day in music class, Ms. Helen arrived on time as always, but didn't look at John. The whole class sat upright, alert. They were waiting for something. But Ms. Helen opened her gradebook, flipped a few pages and said, "We will continue our topic on classical performance technique." No mention of the performance, no praise, no feedback. But her tone had lost its arrogance. John didn't expect recognition from her anymore. He had had enough from his audience, friends, and even those who once doubted him. He had learned this. The actual value doesn't need to be acknowledged. It speaks for itself when the time is right. That afternoon, John received a strange email. The sender, c.hamilton@statearts.edu. Subject, "We saw you." The message was brief. "John, we saw your performance. We'd love to hear more of what you haven't yet shared, if possible. Don't hold back. Your music deserves a bigger stage. State School of the Arts." John reread it. And again, he couldn't believe it. But the email was real. He printed the letter and folded it gently, slipping it inside his guitar folder. No need to show anyone, no need to prove anything anymore. True talent doesn't shout, It simply needs space to be heard. 3 days after the Rodrigo performance, John's video had reached 500,000 views. But it wasn't just the number that mattered. Who was watching? A music teacher in Oregon commented, "If this kid doesn't get a full scholarship, the education system needs to look at itself hard." A conductor from the Chicago Symphony invited John to a summer audition, writing, "I don't usually scout 14-year-olds, but this one is the exception." And then came the media. One Friday morning, as John arrived at school, he saw a news van parked by the front gate. A reporter was adjusting her mic, with a handwritten board behind her. The story of a 14-year-old prodigy, from classroom to concert hall. Sophia and Marcus rushed up to him. "They want to interview you during recess," Marcus whispered, barely containing his excitement. John hesitated. He had never imagined being on TV. But Sophia gently said, "You're not just speaking for yourself. You're speaking for everyone who's ever been underestimated." John nodded. He understood. This wasn't just personal anymore. The interview was simple. No bright lights, no script. The reporter asked, "What do you think helped you overcome the judgment?" John looked straight into the camera, calm. "I didn't overcome it. I walked through it. And let the music go first." The answer, short and precise, went viral fast. A short clip of that quote flooded TikTok, YouTube Shorts, and Instagram Reels, and it was repeated everywhere. Back at school, the atmosphere changed noticeably. Some teachers who had once kept their distance now approached John, asking what pieces he was working on and which style he hoped to pursue. Even Ms. Helen, once the coldest of them all, started changing how she taught. Less rigid theory, more room for emotion and musical meaning. No one said it aloud, but the impact of John's performance was undeniable. And then, something no one expected happened. A representative from the district education office came to visit the school. No advance notice, no ceremony. He requested a meeting with the school board. He also asked to review the video recordings of all music classes from the past 2 months. No one said why, but students whispered, they want to know how a talent like John almost slipped through the cracks. This was no longer just about a student. It was a wake-up call to an entire system, a reminder that talent doesn't come in standard packages, has no preset skin color, and isn't confined by outdated methods. John didn't change the world, but he made the world stop and look back at itself. The first poster appeared on the school's main bulletin board. Honors Concert Night, featuring guest performer John L. and legendary artist Elijah Carter. Not everyone understood the weight of the name Elijah Carter, but to John he was a mentor, a guiding light, the one who once messaged him after a quiet YouTube video 2 years ago. "You have something not every musician learns, a feeling." The concert was held at the city's Grand Theatre, a stage that had seen symphony orchestras, renowned artists, and now a 14-year-old black boy with a worn guitar and a musical soul that had never been fully seen. The morning of the performance, John woke early. Not from excitement, but from fear. Fear of letting people down. Fear that it had all been luck. Fear he didn't deserve to be there. In the small dressing room backstage, he held his mother's guitar, not the expensive one gifted by the Academy. She bought the first guitar from a thrift store, not the polished stage model. Scratched, slightly warped, but full of the hopes of an 8-year-old boy with no words for his dreams yet. Elijah Carter stepped in. No spotlight, no applause, just a mentor, a companion. He placed a hand on John's shoulder. "You scared?" John nodded. "Good," Elijah smiled. "Only the fearless mess up, but the brave ones feel the fear and step onto the stage anyway." John took a deep breath. His fingers tightened around the neck of the guitar. Elijah continued, "You don't have to impress anyone. Just remind them that music doesn't choose shape, skin, or classroom. It only chooses those who truly listen." 20 minutes before the curtain. In the audience, John's father, Marcus, Sophia, the principal, and most surprisingly, Ms. Helen. She sat quietly, saying nothing. Her hand gently rested on the program booklet, where it read, "Performance, John L. Original composition, Mother's Hands, co-written with Elijah Carter." The lights turned a soft blue. The primary mic flicked on. Elijah stepped out first. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I'm not performing a song. I'm standing beside a voice expressed through the sound of a talent who doesn't need an age or resume to introduce him. Just his heart." He turned to look backstage where John stood, hands slightly trembling but eyes steady. "Please welcome, John." John stepped out, no longer the overlooked kid in the back of the class, no longer the boy once labeled not quite enough. He stood before hundreds, but in his mind only one thing echoed. Mom once said, "A single right note at the right moment can save a soul." And then he played the first note. Mother's Hands wasn't just a song, it was a farewell, a cry, an unspoken apology. And when the final notes lingered, soft as his mother's last breath, the entire theater rose. Not a single person remained seated, even Helen. The applause still echoed in John's ears as he walked off stage. Elijah's hand rested gently on his shoulder, a silent, wordless praise. John didn't cry, but something inside him dissolved. Light, free. Outside, the audience hadn't left yet. Groups lingered, whispering, marveling. Who is that kid? What school does he go to? How can a 14-year-old make me feel all that? Meanwhile, in the third row, Ms. Helen sat frozen. From start to finish, she hadn't taken a single note, adjusted her posture, or worn her usual stern expression. She just listened, for the first time as a human, not a teacher. The next day, John returned to school in a daze. Not because people stopped and stared, that had been happening all morning, but because Ms. Helen was waiting for him right outside the classroom. "John," she said, her voice no longer bearing the rigid tone of control, I was wrong." The hallway fell silent. "I was wrong to think music only fits one mold. I've taught music and forgotten that. It's emotion, it's soul." John said nothing. "I won't be the head of the music department next semester." She paused as if gathering herself. "But I will launch a new program where students like you can teach us what the curriculum forgot." That sentence, from the person who had once been his most significant barrier, felt like a door finally opening. In the following weeks, the concert video continued to spread across social media. But it wasn't just a story about a black prodigy. It became a story about a school system that had long undervalued differences, a talent that was almost misjudged because of bias, and a teacher who finally admitted she was wrong. Other schools in the district reached out, inviting John to perform. A national conservatory sent him an honorary scholarship offer. And Elijah Carter, who had performed on the world's most prestigious stages, continued to mentor John every weekend. But for John, fame wasn't the most important thing. One afternoon, while playing guitar in the schoolyard, a more petite, shy, dark-skinned boy, a nervous girl approached him and asked, "Do you think I could play guitar too?" John smiled. He handed the boy his guitar. "It's not about whether you can," he said. "You already have the music in you. You have to listen long enough." He was no longer just a 14-year-old boy. He was an inspiration, a spark, and it all began. For a moment, someone thought it would silence him, One quiet autumn afternoon, nearly a year after that life-changing concert night, John stood before the old wooden doors of Southside High School, where his journey began, with worn-out shoes and a dream he hadn't yet found words for. In his hand was a small guitar, not the expensive one gifted by the Academy, not the polished concert model. But the first guitar his mother bought from a second-hand store was scratched and weathered, but it carried the purest hopes of an 8-year-old boy. John stepped into his old music classroom. Same room, soft yellow lighting, slightly out-of-tune keys, and a corner stacked with faded sheet music. The kids inside looked up at him, some curious, some shy. "You don't know me," John began, setting the guitar on the desk. "But I used to be one of you." I sat there, hands shaking, when I strummed in front of the class for the first time. Not a sound, only wide eyes. People used to think I wasn't good enough and didn't fit the standard of classical music. But I'm not here to tell you about winning or losing. He sat down, cradled the old wooden guitar, and began to play. No flash, no spotlight, just music, honest, warm, deeply human. A little girl in the front row closed her eyes, tapping softly to the rhythm. A boy tilted his head, trying to listen closer, like something in the melody was reaching into a quiet part of him he hadn't named yet. When the piece ended, John smiled. "Music doesn't need permission," he said. "It just needs someone brave enough to listen and to trust the sound inside themselves." Then he pulled a folded announcement from his backpack, the official letter about the John Anderson Scholarship Fund, offered to students passionate about music but lacking the means, funded by Juilliard and the musicians who had walked alongside John through his journey. "Starting this year, one student here will receive a full scholarship to learn guitar every semester, and you, not the teachers, will decide who gets it. Not based on grades, but on passion." The music teacher, the only one who had believed in John, then stood silently, eyes glistening. John stepped out of the school and stood on the old stone steps. A breeze stirred the trees. He looked up at the sky, vast and blue, like how his mother once described the future. No limits, as long as you're willing to fly. The old guitar gently hummed with each step in the satchel on his shoulder.